This video is going to cover a lot of recommendations I have in how to start improvisation or how to start improv for guitar solos. This video will get a little lengthy, and that's because I really wanted to have something for students I work with directly. This way they have a guide to follow, some tips to get started with improvisation, how to ease into it, how to progress with it. And even if you are not a student of mine, hopefully you can get some good use out of this video too. I'm going to talk about how to really start slow with it, talk about different scale shapes you can use, how to begin combining scale shapes, how to focus on things to help you break out of your comfort zone, how to stop playing the same patterns again and again and again. And I will be using backing tracks from a channel called YT Jam Tracks. I assume it means YouTube Jam Tracks. But yeah, YT Jam Tracks. This guy has a lot of stuff that I have a lot of fun playing on top of. That being said, use any backing track that you like. It's very important when you are trying to practice improvisation. You play to a track that you actually enjoy. If you're trying to force yourself to solo on top of something you don't like, you're going to be missing out on, well, a lot of fun and really good learning experience. Because if you can't feel what you're trying to play on top of something that you're just like, ugh, it's not going to go well. You really want to be able to connect with what you're doing. And of course, the more you play, the more improv that you do, the easier it will become for you to really feel good about what you're doing, to have a connection with the notes you're playing. But I don't think you need too much experience listening to a backing track to know if you like it or not. So if you listen to the track that you're trying to play on top of and you're just like, forget it, find another one. Now, if you are a student of mine, there's a really good chance that what's on screen right now looks familiar. I'm going to reference these shapes for a lot of things we're going to talk about here, but you can apply the principles discussed in this lesson with really any scale that you want to learn, you want to get better at, or any key that you wish to solo in. The key of the backing track I'm going to use is in A minor, which is the relative minor to the key of C. So I like to start with that major scale first, also known as the Ionian mode, because this is where all theory comes from when it comes to creating modes, manipulating scales, creating chords, understanding chords, whatnot. Having a good understanding of that major scale is foundational. So even though we're playing over an A minor backing track, the C major scale shape works just fine. In fact, all of these scale shapes in here, every single one of them, work perfectly fine. The reason why is because we're just playing the same 7 notes. That's it. It's just those 7 notes, nothing else. And because we are playing the same 7 notes in these various shapes here, it fits over the chord progression we're going to be using. So when it comes to using a scale shape to use in practicing improvisation, it really doesn't matter so long as it's in key. The C Ionian shape, the D Dorian shape, E Phrygian, F Lydian, all this stuff, it's in the key of C major or in the key of A minor. Again, the key of A minor is the relative minor to the key of C. They're the same notes, the exact same notes. Typically, the chord progression you play on top of will determine the mode you're playing in. And because this chord progression continues to focus on A as the tonal center and using the notes in the key of A minor, it makes this an A Aeolian mode, which is your A natural minor scale. All right, so here goes the backing track. Again, I highly recommend this guy's stuff, but you don't have to use the material here or his material. Use whatever you like. That's very important again. Very important you choose a backing track you enjoy. So, getting started using this C Ionian shape or the C major scale shape, I do recommend, again, if you're just starting out, just go really easy with it. Just go up and down that scale shape, but do so slowly. Gotta hear how things sound. And you might pick up on a note that really stands out to you. It sounds really nice. So that was just going up and down. That's scale shape, that first one on the screen. Just up and down slowly, but every note's the same distance apart. So what you can do next is start putting different gaps in between those notes. For example, so that's just one way to start creating some variation when you're just going up and down the scale. Putting some rhythm in there. And rhythm really is just a matter of like how you are spacing up your notes. And what can really make something sound interesting is how you do space those notes out. It's the space in between the notes that makes music interesting. So try doing little rhythmic variations when you're going up and down the scale there. And because this is improvisation, there is no right or wrong way of doing this. You have to experiment. You have to try things. Sometimes it'll sound great, sometimes it'll sound terrible, and that's fine. Things are going to have to sound terrible every now and then when you're learning how to do this. Remember, no right or wrong way in practicing improvisation. The main thing is, does it sound good? That's the most important thing. Now, you could also say, well, don't you have to also stay in key? Well, there's a really good chance that what you play will sound better if you stay in key versus out of key. But you could technically play a bunch of notes that are not in key if you do like it. You probably won't, but you might. But yeah, the important thing about improvisation is having fun expressing yourself with some notes. So let's get back to the track. Same idea of like kind of going up and down slowly, but another thing you can do is kind of go up a little bit, back a little bit, up a little bit, and back a little bit. So something like this. I'm going to put a little bit more speed on it now. And of course, adding some rhythmic spacing can make something like that sound a lot more interesting. So I really was like just kind of going up and down on a string and then going up to the next, down, up and down, just kind of back and forth through that. That's really a lot of solos that you listen to. It's just kind of going up and down the notes and putting rhythmic variation in between those notes. Another thing is you don't have to keep changing notes every single time you pick. Sometimes it sounds good to hang out on the same note several times before moving on to another one. Let's try that idea next. So hopefully you noticed that a lot of times I would stay on one note, but get rhythmic with it. So that's something you can definitely try when you are practicing improv. Stay on a note that sounds good to you against the chord progression you're playing, and try and get a little rhythmic with it. Play some, a burst of fast notes followed by some slower notes. Just kind of have fun experimenting with different rhythms while you're playing. Again, there is no right or wrong way to do this. Just try it, see if you like it. And when you do play something that you like, you're like, yes, that sounded great, or that was really cool. Try doing it again and again and again. Because when you come across something that you like the sound of, you want to be able to call upon that more than once. A lot of guitar solos is really just like a bag of tricks or bag of licks that people call on just over and over and over again. If you ever start studying different guitar solos out there, you'll probably start to notice that, hey, this pattern is used here and here and here and here, and just it happens all the time. Of course, you don't have to just keep going up and down, up and down, up and down, one note after the next in order. You can absolutely skip notes. You can skip strings. It really doesn't matter, again, that whole idea of there's no right or wrong way to do this. It doesn't matter if you play, consecutive notes, meaning like one note right after the next. You can absolutely start skipping notes all over the place. It's really just a matter of, again, trying something, see if you like it. Now, when you learn a bunch of new scale shapes, arpeggio shapes, chord shapes, all that good theory stuff, it really can help you start to come up with ideas that you may not have done so just by fooling around. So there's definitely some merit to improving your improvisation ability by learning chord theory, because you can start to see all kinds of new shapes laid out on the fretboard that you may not have thought about before learning those new chord shapes. So this is not going to turn into a big chord theory lesson. I did just want to point that out. Now, if you are a student of mine, yeah, we're going to be going over chord shapes for sure. And there will be some demonstration of using chord shapes for improv in this video, but this will not be an in-depth chord theory lesson. That would take way too long and completely take us off track. All right, so I'm going to rewind here on the track a little bit since we're almost done with the whole thing. And let's do what was just mentioned. Start skipping some notes, maybe skip some strings here and there, and just show you some ideas you can try. And like I mentioned earlier, go slow at first. Really good idea to go slow and just listen to how things sound. There's definitely a time and place to play things as fast as you can or as fast as you want, but when you're learning to do improvisation, going slow is a very good idea to start with. All right, so far I've been staying in that C major scale shape the entire time. Part of that is to show you can do a lot of stuff in one place on the guitar. Now, when it comes time for you to start practicing other scale shapes, and for my students, there's a real good chance we have begun scale memorization work. So it's a good idea, and a fun idea, I think. Practice improvisation in whatever scale shape you are currently trying to memorize. So perhaps you are trying to memorize the E Phrygian shape up here on the 12th fret to start. Let's use that now. Same ideas. You can start off by going up and down slowly, hear how those notes sound, and then go up and down slowly again, but start putting some spacing in between the notes to start making it sound a little more interesting. And eventually you start like weaving up and down throughout the scale, and then start skipping some notes and just kind of just bouncing around within that shape. See what sounds good to you. Now, with that in mind, when you start bouncing around and you're trying to get away from just going one note after the next in order, it can start to get a little bit tricky, and I think that's where people can start to feel lost in this stuff, and they're like, oh, I don't know where to start, I don't know where to end. For me, when I'm doing this, I'm really relying on my ear to let me know this sounds like a good place to hang out for a second, or this feels like home. And so that's kind of like what I'm doing. Like, I'm looking for a home to go to. Like, you start in one spot, you venture away, and then you go to another home on the fretboard. A good place to start here, if you really want to have a note to begin with, because we're in the key of A minor, start with an A note. You can do that. You don't have to start on an A note. You can start with anything that you want, because the idea is that you create tension and release it. Create tension and release it. So basically, you can start with the tension and then release it. But you're basically looking for a place to stop that sounds like it's resolved. So when you hit a note and you're like, yep, that feels right to stay there for a minute. So do that. Maybe not a full minute, but stay there for a second or two. And then you look for another note to go to. You just venture off to another place on the fretboard or within the scale shape until you find another thing. You're like, yep, that sounds good. Now, when you're first trying this, again, go slow. In fact, you might have to go slow in order to allow your ears the chance to hear when it sounds good or when it doesn't. The more you do this, the easier it's going to get to know when to stop and when to keep going. Sometimes it sounds good to hang out on a tension note. What is a tension note? Basically, you play a note and it feels like something's not quite resolved. It's like, yeah, it kind of fits, maybe not so much, and then you keep going from there. But to sit on a tension note, that can still be really good, because again, we want to create tension and release it. Anyway, let's get to using this E Phrygian scale shape over here, or mode shape, and let's try those ideas. So I'm going to start by going up and down nice and slow, and then up and down again, but add some rhythmic variation to it. And then I'll start weaving back and forth through the strings as I climb higher and back down, and again adding some rhythmic variation to that, so it sounds more interesting than just straight dat with the notes. And then I will begin to bounce around within the scale shape, looking for a place to resolve, and then make some tension, resolve, make some tension, release, and all that stuff that was just talked about. Here we go. And when you're doing this, you come across a spot in that scale shape, you're like, man, that sounds really good. Just stay there. Stay in the spot that sounded good to you and get more familiar with it. You don't have to go all the way up and down when you're learning this stuff. This is just a suggestion to get started. If you find a spot, like for example, I'm going to start going back up. Like maybe you start going slow again. You're like, man, those three notes sound really good there. Start doing something with those three notes. And that's going to happen when you're exploring these scale shapes. So anyway, back to the idea that was going to be done. So now going up and down again, but adding some rhythmic variation. Now kind of weaving back and forth through the strings, climbing up and down nice and slow with some rhythm. Now let's start bouncing around. So those are some pretty basic ideas to help you get started with improvisation. And that's just using one scale shape at a time, though. So what about using more than one scale shape? All right, so let's come down to this Aeolian shape. And I'm going to add some notes here, basically some notes down here in this B-Locrian shape. So right now we're basically looking at a combined Aeolian and B-Locrian shape. And when it comes down to it, because we are playing on a backing track or on top of a backing track that is in Aeolian, all of this stuff is really Aeolian because of the backing track. There's a complicated answer and a somewhat simple answer that I could give as to why that is. Well, the simple answer is because of, I think I mentioned it earlier, A is the tonal center of the backing track. It continues to go from A, or the A minor chord, to some other chords, but back to A minor. It's always coming back to A minor, back to A minor, back to A minor. So that's a big reason why it's in Aeolian. Now, you can have an A minor chord for an A Dorian mode or an A Phrygian mode, but those would be different keys, and that's for a different lesson. So anyway, technically, all these scale shapes, when used on that A minor backing track, it's going to sound like Aeolian regardless of the naming for these scale shapes. Now, again, if you're a student of mine, we should have talked about the mode stuff by now if you already have this sheet and you're going through memorizing it and we're talking improvisation. If we haven't talked about the modes yet, please remind me to do so with you. It may have slipped my mind, and I apologize for that. Now, again, we are looking at a combination of this Aeolian shape and this B-Locrian shape down here. All the numbers that are in these shapes, let's not worry about that right now. It has to do with interval numbers that make a mode what it is, but we're more concerned about the dots on the fretboard. So anyway, now that we have a visualization of the two shapes, basically start playing anywhere within those two. Now, I was able to put those notes in there because of the website I'm using, Guitar Scientist. Very, very cool thing. Highly recommend checking it out. GuitarScientist.com. It allows you to create all kinds of scale shapes and chord diagrams and all kinds of interesting things. Highly recommend checking it out. GuitarScientist.com. For a student of mine, you won't have the combination thing here. You'll just have these two. But you can still visualize going between those two. In fact, you can start visualizing going between everything down here in this bottom image. But because we're on the website right now, let's take advantage of it. Let's get those notes back in. And we're going to use everything right here. This gives us a lot more room for exploration. So now we can really start sliding around, skipping some notes, changing strings in different ways, and visualizing chord shapes. Our ability to do that has just increased because we have extra notes now. So I'm going to do some more improv demonstration using this combination right here. And you can do that with any of the scale shapes. You can do 2 at a time, as just now demonstrated. You can do 3, 4. Eventually, the idea is everything, just like it shows here. These are all the notes in the key of C up to the 19th fret, which is kind of cut off right now, isn't it? Let's bring that out. There we go. So yeah, all the notes in the key of C laid out on the fretboard up to the 19th fret. So this gives total freedom all over the place. However, sometimes having that much freedom can actually restrain you from doing whatever you want, because you're just staring at the fretboard and it's like, oh God, where am I supposed to go? If you're in that position where it's like too much, but you're done with learning each individual scale, you've already done like 2 or 3 scale shapes together, but you want to be able to branch out more, but you're just not really sure what to do with the entire fretboard because it just seems too much. What you could do is maybe play in one scale shape and then another that's very far apart. So perhaps you play in that Aeolian shape, and then you jump up to that E Phrygian shape. So maybe you could play something down here, and then you jump way up there. So let's demonstrate that. Another thing you can do is restrict yourself to one string. This can open up all kinds of possibilities because you're forced to keep yourself in one spot. Well, you can move left to right all day long, but you got to stay on one string. So let's demonstrate that using the high E string. Really use that open string too. And if you know how to finger tap, great time to practice improvising with some finger tapping. Now, 2 strings at a time is another good thing you can do. So let's try the high E and B string at the same time. Obviously, I went a little nuts there, but that's part of improv. Having fun with it. It doesn't matter if you just play on the high E and B string for this two-string idea. You can do any two strings. You can do the low E and A. You can do the A and D. In fact, you could do, let's say, the A and G string. So you're nothing but the A and the G string. So you got to skip a string when you're doing this. There's a good chance I'm going to screw something up here. Remember, there's no right and wrong when it comes to improv. Let's give that a try. And if you think you're going to be stumbling around and hitting wrong notes a lot while doing this string skipping idea, go slow. Go slow. Alright, I messed up. I ended up doing a slide on the low E string there. But I got into it, damn it. So there you go. Sometimes that happens too. So there. Bunch of ideas. Hopefully they will be helpful and give you some new ways of thinking about improvisation. So here's another thing you could try. You definitely want to have these scales memorized, or at least have something like on screen right now to visualize the fretboard more easily. And that's one cool thing about the YT Jam Tracks channel. It's all squished on the screen right now, but right in here, that's the fretboard. Same thing as this over here. Just squished because I'm trying to get everything on screen. But it's really cool because he basically helps you have something to reference while you are doing your improvisation. Another reason why I like this channel. So what you can do is play one note on one string, and then you have to change strings for the next note. You have to keep changing strings. You can come up with some pretty cool sounding arpeggios this way, but it could be challenging as well. But hey, that's part of the process. You got to be challenged in order to grow. Because if you're always comfortable, you're not growing. So let's demonstrate this idea next, where you are changing strings every time you pick a new note. That was bad, but hey, that's part of the process, isn't it? There we go. That's what I wanted to do. There. So there's a teachable moment. I'm glad I screwed up because that gave me another idea to share. Let's say you do just what I did. You were trying to play something, you played a wrong note. whoops, try to do what you were going to do again. And when you get it, play it several more times. This way you can address the mistake you made when you were trying to play something, and then you can better recall that lick or the riff later on when you're doing other improv stuff. So remember, as I mentioned earlier, improvisation is really just a big bag of tricks or licks that you continue to use again and again and again and again and again. Sometimes it really comes down to just how you vary the licks, or how you use the tricks in different orders that creates a new solo. That's why I was just now staying in the same spot, trying to do it again and again, so this way I could play what I was actually trying to play. And these things are going to happen when you're learning how to do improv. You're going to make mistakes. It's part of the game, and it's not a bad thing. Every now and then you might make a mistake that sounds really good, and then you basically stumbled into a really cool riff, a really cool idea that, like, you were trying to play one fret, but you ended up hitting another one on accident, and then it ended up sounding way better than you had anticipated. Those are cool discoveries. When it comes to improvising in other keys, same idea is going to apply. The same scale shapes are going to apply when you are dealing with stuff that comes from a major scale. So that includes your Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, and so on. So a little bit less fancy scale diagrams for this key that I currently have ready to go. But this G Ionian shape is the exact same shape as C Ionian. You just move it down from starting on the 8th fret to the 3rd fret. And then you apply the same ideas that you did with the key of C. So when you're learning a brand new key, you can start the process all over again. Start with one scale shape, go up and down nice and slow, and then start adding rhythmic variation as you're going up and down the notes. And whenever you want to, start skipping notes, changing strings more frequently, or skipping strings, and really get familiar with the scale shape in the new place. Because even though it's the same scale shape, because you're in a different spot, like just looking at the frets down here versus where you may have been used to playing, it can mess with you a little bit. It certainly messes with me when I'm playing at a key that I'm not familiar with. The shape's the same, yes, but you visually see, hey, I'm in a different place on the fretboard. It can play tricks on you. But the only way to get better at playing in a brand new key is you gotta keep playing in a new key. And really the best way to get good at improvisation is you have to do it over and 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 over. I think you get the point. I hope you get the point, because you got to do it a lot. You got to do it a lot. You got to do it a lot. I said it before already plenty of times, but I feel it's worth repeating again. There is no right or wrong way in how to do this. The most important thing is having fun and making sure it sounds good. Of course, if it doesn't sound good, you're probably not having fun. So maybe that's like a goes without saying thing, right? Of course you're having fun, but I hate the way it sounds. But it's fun, but I hate it. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, just have fun with it. The more you do it, the easier it gets. It does take time. It does take practice like anything else. Now, when it comes to technique, playing rhythm accurately, those are instances where I'm really, really big on only perfect practice makes perfect. With improvisation, I feel it's hard to say, well, what's perfect? Because you can't really be focused on being perfect. You want good sounding notes for sure. So if you're playing notes that are out of key and it sounds bad to you, make sure you stay in key. And as shown just a little while ago, I hit a note that was not in key. I did not like the sound of it, so I corrected it and I played what I wanted to a few times. This way I did get my perfect practice and got rid of that mistake. I addressed my mistake, which is okay. It's part of the process when it comes to improvisation. But I addressed my mistake and played what I wanted to, and then I moved on from there, which I think I just stopped playing so I could talk about that moment. Perhaps that's how we can do perfect practice when it comes to improvisation practice. If you attempt to play something and you hit a wrong note, well, try it again until you get the note that you wanted to, or until you find something that you do like. And when you do come across something that you like, repeat it. Play it several times. Yes, chord shapes. I did a little bit of that stuff when it came to changing strings every single time we pick a new note. Let's talk about chord shapes here. Let's use the key of G since we have it up. And once again, I'm going to use a track from YT Jam Tracks. Let's actually show his logo in there. There it is. So that's what it looks like, YT Jam Tracks. This next thing we're going to demonstrate, I feel, is going to be beneficial for those who know about chord shapes, and for students, my students, the chord shapes you and I have worked with. This will show you how you can apply that to improvisation. And one of the first things we work on with chord theory, not the first thing, but one of them, is some triad shapes using just 3 strings. These things. So we can use that to help with improvisation. So instead of just holding the chord, we use notes in that shape. And I like to use that shape, or a shape like that, and then play notes around that shape. There we go, that's what I was trying to do. See, that's how we can do perfect practice. I made a mistake, I addressed it, and got it right. Definitely a good idea. Learn your chord stuff. Learn the chord theory, learn the shapes, because it can really open up all kinds of interesting possibilities that you just never would have thought of without seeing and learning and hearing all kinds of new chord shapes. I feel that's a pretty good summary of how I recommend getting started with improvisation practice. So if you have any questions about what was discussed in this video, please let me know. And if you are a student of mine, we will address any of the questions you have in your lessons for sure. And if you're not a student of mine, at least directly, but you have any questions about this video, hey, you let me know too. The final thing I will say, and this goes back to my saying that you have to do improvisation practice over and over and over and over and over again. If you want to get good at this stuff and you want to get comfortable with it, at least 5 days a week, I recommend, again, 5 days a week, just play to one backing track. If you do that, like a 5 to 10 minute backing track, that's, 25 to 50 minutes, 25 to 50 improv practice throughout the week. And if you just do a little bit like that each day, several days a week, it's going to compound, it's going to build, and it'll just get easier and easier and easier. Now, you can certainly do more. You can do less, but if you're brand new to it and you really want to get good in the fastest amount of time possible, do more. do more. This is something that is very beneficial to do a lot of. But if you are going to try doing a lot, like a big session someday, when you start feeling mentally drained and fatigued, just give it a break. Let your mind rest, because yeah, you will get to a point where you're just tired if you play too long too often. So just a little bit spread out, I feel, is going to result in much better benefits than just doing a ton in one day. Like doing like a 5 or 6 hour practice session once a week, not as beneficial as doing like 10 minutes each day for like 5 days a week at least. You can do 6 and 7 days as well. But yeah, 5 days a week, 5 to 10 minutes of improv practice, it's going to build. It will, definitely. All right, I think that's it. And if I do think of anything else to add after this video is published, I'll just put it in the comments on the video. And again, if you have questions, please, 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 please tell me.